Mr. Andrew Carpenter, thank you so much on, I guess, fairly short notice for sitting down and talking to me. I found what you're doing online on social media unbelievably interesting, but also super important. So thank you for coming.
No, I appreciate it. And I mean, I started wanting to use social media as a tool to actually advise parents about the risks that their children face. And I mean, I've been doing this area of law for about 13, 14 years now. And it seems like no matter what I do, I can get the message across. And I started doing the weekly statistics numbers and started just highlighting how prevalent child abuse is in Australia. And my main thing is just wanted to make sure that my children and their friends don't have to experience anything like this. And it's not something we can arrest out of, but it's something we can definitely minimise as much as possible.
So you've been described as the most hated man in Australia by sex offenders, which is a pretty good title, as well as we can't say the P word on here, but the P word hunter as well, hunting these people down. Can you just describe yourself a little bit? You're a solicitor, and what do solicitors do in this whole realm of sort of chasing down hunting and for trying to get convictions?
Yeah, well, I don't do any criminal law, so I do the civil side, because the conviction rates for child abuse are 0.003%. So, for instance, every 1,000 reports of child sexual abuse, 100 get investigated by police, 6 get convicted, and 3 get overturned on appeal.
Can you say that statistic again?
So every 1,000 reports, only 100 are investigated by police, 6 result in convictions, and 3 are overturned on appeal. So every 1,000 reports of child abuse, you only see 3 people convicted. So I did a talk about a year or two ago, and I said I wanted to do something that highlight how bad it was and how unlikely it is for someone to be convicted, because people hear 99.997% chance of getting away with it. They don't really see that as a real thing. And I said at this talk, look, the most trusted news source to me in Australia is Sportsbet. Like, they know everything.
They're putting their money where their mouth is too. If
Exactly.
If you get something wrong, it doesn't have any effect on them. If they get something wrong, they're paying out lots of money.
Yeah, and I said at a conference, I said the closest odds on Sportsbet I could see to child abuse would be the Australian politics results. And paying 100 to 1 to become the next Prime Minister of Australia at that time was Pauline Hanson and Bob Katter. And you think how remote it is that those two will be Prime Minister. People in the crowd, they just dropped. They just thought, wow, that's a real likelihood. And so years ago, I started doing abuse claims, and then I had a child of my own in 2019. And then when I went to drop him off at school, so at childcare for the first time, after doing this area of law for years, it finally dawned on me that I now have to trust other people with my son. And in 2023, the Australian Maltreatment Study came out and it said 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused for their 18th birthday. And so I've gone, right, well, I know how bad this is. I want to try and do something to make sure that my son is not targeted, or my other children aren't targeted, or their friends aren't targeted. So that's when I started the Super for Survivors campaign. So I saw all these offenders for years using loopholes where if they don't get convicted. It's too hard to convict a child sex offender.
Why is that? Why is it too hard in a court of law to convict a child sex offender?
So the average time frame, according to the Royal Commission, for someone to report abuse was 23.9 years. And you think if someone asked you what you were doing 24 years ago on September 30, 2001, bad maths, you would be like, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know what I was wearing that day, what day it was, where I was. A lot of people that were sexually abused as a child, they can't remember exact dates unless it's on a date like it's Christmas Day or a birthday. At best, they can remember, I was wearing my summer school uniform, so it must have been term 1 or term 4. They can't pinpoint those dates, and so that's why it's hard for people to convict beyond reasonable doubt. Where in the civil side of things is on the balance of probabilities. So I always use the example of O.J. Simpson. It was clear as day that he's done it. All the evidence showed that he did it, but the beyond reasonable doubt was there was a police officer that made racial statements and gave inconsistent testimony a second time around, and the jury went, well, we can't prove it beyond reasonable doubt now. But when O.J. Simpson was sued in the civil side, they said, right, well, we find that on the balance of probabilities, you are most likely to have committed these murders. And so although people can't get the justice in the criminal sphere, they can then go and sue. But most people don't realise that they can't sue. They don't realise if police don't want to investigate, or if charges get dropped or someone gets found not guilty. People think that's the end of it. But the offenders have basically weaponised this system where they know that, well, this person has to give evidence. I sit there in silence. Their whole life is turned upside down. And so when I saw how many people aren't getting convictions and I was suing people that didn't get convictions, I thought, well, hang on, what kind of thing can I do to actually try to prevent this from happening? And so there's a prime example, Pete Liddy, who was the longest serving South Australian magistrate. I think he's been the longest serving Australian magistrate at one time. He was a magistrate for about 25 years, and he was arrested in 2000. Before he was sentenced in 2001, his $1 million house in the Barossa wine region went all his weird collectibles. Like, he collected like old medieval things and army and pirate bullions and things like that, really weird stuff, all disappeared. And then when he went to prison, he said, I've got $10,000 to my name, you can't touch me. But because he was a longer serving magistrate, he was employed as a government worker before 1987 for more than 20 years, he was entitled to retire on 80% of his wage. And so he's been sitting in prison for 25 years, effectively earning 80% of his wage as a magistrate. And yet all that happened, his victim survivors got $10,000 each from the government. So he could walk out of prison with millions and millions of dollars in the bank, and it can't be touched. And so my mind turned to back in 2020 when I started the Super Survivors campaign is, well, if these guys aren't getting convicted, what can we do to try and firstly deter offending, compensate victim survivors, and make sure that the taxpayer is not meeting the cost of this? Because these offenders are waving the white flag saying, can't touch me, I'll declare bankruptcy, taxpayer will meet my crimes, I'll get out of prison if I do, or the charge will get dropped and I'll live comfortably on my superannuation the rest of my life. I've thought, you know what, if you can try to deter offending, or at least make people think twice, because they'll lose every single cent they've ever worked for, most people would think twice. Like, the reason I'm not doing 100 k's an hour on the way to work every morning, talking on the phone and ripping bongs, is because I don't want to fine. I'm not a drug user. I'm just making that comparison. But most people, when they look at drink driving, when they look at speeding using their phone, most people that do that are normally good drivers. They just don't want the fines, because most people, if you've never had a speeding fine in your life, if you get $1,000 fine, you incur 3 demerit points, you're not going to care about the points. You're going to look at the fine, and that's one thing. Look at ASIC, for instance. ASIC stopped heavily prosecuting directors that breached their directors' duties, and they've gone, let's just issue these guys with fines. And you look at the dodginess in companies, how it's gone down when people realise that the balls are on the line. So something like this, where we can actually have a law change that will impact victim survivors, deter offending, when the conviction rate is appalling and most people don't even want to go to the police, thought, well, this could turn the tides in favour of victim survivors. And so many people are supportive of this. And I've said in every interview from day one, the only people against this change will be the sex offenders themselves. So the Liberals in 2018, they wanted to do this. In 2022, before the election, we did a current affairs story. Liberals said, if we get back in, we're going to pass it. Labor didn't make any comments on it. Before this year's election, current affairs story, Liberals said they'll do it. Labor said they don't want to touch superannuation entitlements. But this year, for instance, $25.1 billion of revenue in the national budget came from the taxation of superannuation funds held by Australians. So as it stands now, the Australian government is more than happy to tax hard-working Australian superannuation, then go after the superannuation of child sex offenders. And so my big thing was deterrent. You look at all these law changes that are in this sphere, they're all things that after the fact, after for sentencing, character references, mandatory minimum, things like that. But there's nothing up front deterring this from occurring. And that's what my change was aimed at. It's, we can't arrest out of this problem. People are going to offend, but at least try to say to them, look, you really want to lose everything you've ever worked for? Because most victim survivors can't work, will never work, go without groceries to afford medication, things like that. And their life is effectively ruined. It's a life sentence of victim survivors. Their trauma is with them for a lifetime. And the taxpayer meets the cost of these offenders. They meet Centrelink, PBS, Medicare, everything. And these offenders just sit there and they can live comfortably on their assets and not have to pay a cent.
For those who are in my international audience, superannuation is a retirement scheme where it's locked away until you reach then retirement age, and then that is unlocked. Typically, you can't touch this. Yeah. Where you're saying, you can go in and touch this for this crime you've committed, to not only, firstly, to deter people actually doing this sickening act, but the ones who will continue and do this sickening act, to then help the victim of this.
And if you've worked in Australia since 1985, you have superannuation. It is your employer pays a contribution to your wage that you can't touch until you're 67 years old. And so what a lot of these offenders are doing is they're selling their assets and they're defending matters, and they're then declaring bankruptcy and telling the victim survivors, can't touch me, all the time. While if they've sold their assets, they put all their money in superannuation. And I had one guy in a beachside suburb of South Australia. He sat back on his chair. He was convicted, one of the few that was convicted of it. Now, this poor girl, and I never go into details in my interview, so I won't go into details today, but her parents would have to drive around 3 or 4 nights a week and try to look at every different bridge around Victoria to try and find it, because she would always try to harm herself. And when we started suing this offender, he owns a multi-million-dollar property here. He sat back on his chair and said, I'd much rather pay a QC 50 grand a day than give that girl a cent because she ruined my life. Now, people witnessed it occurring. It happened in public. It happened in private. She disclosed right away. And he blamed her for it. And then when we went to sue him, he said, I'll just sell my house and declare bankruptcy. I've got $3 million super in the bank. Can't touch me. And this is what we're dealing with. We've got offenders that when they do go to jail, or if they do go to jail, the first thing that happens is everyone in prisons talks about child offenders because they're put in a country club. They're not put in general pop. They're put in ways where they talk about war stories. They say, there's a certain woman in an area, if you give her $100 for drugs, she'll give you access to their children. It's sickening, and they all know these loopholes, and you see it time and time again that they keep exploiting it, and it's about time it stops. Like, this is the one thing that every offender does. If they do go to prison, they cover their tracks, and this is not something the taxpayer has to bear the cost of. I mean, in 2016, there's an organisation called Bravehearts, and they're in, I think, Queensland, and they did a study on what they believe the national cost back in 2016 to the taxpayer was. And they said back then it could be as high as $30.1 billion a year. And you think in this year's budget, the total cost of running the government in Australia for the year was $31 billion. And that's running officers, staff, wages, assets, everything. So you could run the entire cost of the government for what the $30.1 billion is costing, and guess how many, or guess the amount of child sex offenders are putting into that?
A couple of thousand?
0.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And that's the cost of the taxpayer. That's, Medicare, Centrelink, everything like that. And what we see with these offenders is they're just like, too bad. There was a guy in Victoria who, this is a prime example about the bankruptcy loopholes. It was Barry Cable. He was the AFL, I think, legend they call him. They removed his status. The night before his trial, where he was being sued for sexually assaulting 2 children, he declared bankruptcy. And now, as soon as he declared bankruptcy, they can't get the judgment sum. He's waved the white flag. They'll never see a cent of it. He'll go bankrupt, and then in 3 years' time, when his bankruptcy's up, he can go work again, do everything, but his superannuation is preserved. He's just going to live on that comfortably, not have to worry, wouldn't have a care in the world, because he knows that the taxpayer is going to meet his cost of the victims of crime, and he's just going to sit there and live off his super and have no cares in the world.
So what is, and this may be a difficult question, but what is the most common scenario that we are seeing when children are assaulted? Like, so you mentioned people of power in the community. Of course, you've got then family, you've got friends. You said then even someone, you give them $100, you have access to their children, which is sickening to even think about. And that 1 in 5, 1 in 3, all of these figures. Where is these really high risk areas? And I know you've spoken a lot about institutions and schools, and we know the churches and everything too. Give us an idea of where the most common.
Well, so when they set up the redress scheme, they put billions of dollars into that, but institutional abuse only accounts for 4% of all Australian child sex offending. 80% of all child sexual offending is incestual. Fathers, grandfathers, uncles, siblings. 92% is known, so that's coaches, family friends, godfathers, and then it's the 8% which is just strangers. And we think when we were young it was stranger danger, don't get in a car with strangers, don't do that. But when all the issues were happening in Victoria and Queensland about the childcare centres where thousands of kids were getting STD checked, and they found hundreds of thousands of images on these guys' phones, or the Victorian one is allegedly because he's still before the courts, but Ashley Griffiths in Queensland, he had like 1,500 charges about 350 children. But with matters like that, it's known to the victim survivor, and we look at, when it comes to familial abuse, it's, you know, in the 70s and 80s, it's, you know, hey, don't tell on dad because, you know, he's the breadwinner and I stay at home. People are very still reluctant to come forward and speak about that, but it's not a stranger danger thing. It's mainly like, well, so I was going back on the childcare scenario. When the childcare issues were happening, people started saying when to pull our children out of childcare and be at home. But the most dangerous place for a child is at home when it comes to family and sexual violence.
Yeah, by the statistics of that ancestral, as you speak about.
And that's why people always say to me, I started about a year and a half ago doing weekly stats about highlighting the percentages of people every week charged to the district court. And it's usually around about 25% per day where crimes are related to sexual abuse of a child. There was one, it was last November. It was the highest day that we've had ever since I started doing this. It was 53% of all matters in court that day.
So all matters in court that day?
All in matters in the District Court of South Australia. 53% of them.
More than half.
Related to child sexual abuse. And the lead story on the news that night was there was a Green senator that was complaining about a McDonald's or a Hungry Jack's being built within a kilometre of a primary school because it's dangerous to children, fast food. And now everyone always comments on my post, why aren't the media reporting on this? Because 80% of all matters before the courts are incestual. And so by law, you cannot report on the offender or identify the victim survivor because they're protected. So it's only the ones where you see where it's a stranger or a sports coach or a teacher or something like that that's not a direct relationship, where there's no prospects of identifying the victim survivor. Even there was one a while ago, it was a guy was abusing his neighbour and they couldn't show his face on TV because it could have identified the victim survivor. So the reason why it doesn't happen is because there's laws against it, and a lot of people think that's unfair, but it's not about what the community wants at times, it's about the victim survivor. So many people don't want to come out and report this. Like I've had professional fighters disclose to me, I've had actors, I've had musicians, I had a bikie once tell me something what happened to him, and people just don't want to report, and that's their story. They don't have to report if they don't want to. I've been a big proponent for years about the setting up a sex offender registry, but it was an election promise of Peter Dutton, which failed. It's been an election promise of the South Australian state Labor government, and that was 2022. They still haven't implemented it. And we're seeing victim survivors constantly getting bruised and battered because the governments come up and say, oh, we're going to have these new policies and never implement them. So look at my super campaign. It's almost 6 years it's been going for now. It's an absolute no-brainer. I don't know anyone against it, but it hasn't changed because this is not an area that politicians think is a vote getter, because everyone hates sex offenders. And I always say my wife is part of the problem, because whenever I'm on the news for anything about this, she doesn't want to watch. And her reaction is, I've got young children. I said, but this is the reason why we need to look at this. It's people cannot turn a blind eye to this. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused for their 18th birthday. If you think, imagine if 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys were taking meth and crashing into sober poles every week, how much education would be across the board with that? But because if you put something like this on the news, radio, people will just change the channel right away.
Yeah,
they don't want to hear
uncomfortable.
It.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but as I always say with things that are uncomfortable, it goes down to sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Well, you think 20 years ago, no one spoke about mental health. 15 years ago, no one spoke about suicide. 10 years ago, no one spoke about domestic violence. You know, we need to have uncomfortable conversations to bring things to the surface, because you think if we still lived in an age where no one spoke about mental health and, you know, suicides are through the roof, you think, well, this is a problem that everyone knows. There's help out there. Talk to your friends. I've heard sayings over and over again, I'd rather you crying on my shoulder than me crying at your funeral. And it's only when we start addressing things publicly when people will address it. You've had people like Russell Manson, Madeline West, Terry Crews, Kate Miller-Heidke have all come forward and said we're abused as children. And people then start going, hang on, if this real blokey bloke or this, you know, beautiful actress or talented singer are coming forward saying this happened to them, you know, they're my inspiration. I want to report because I can show that they can get on with their life. There is help out there, and you need more people coming forward and actually explaining this and talking about it, because the only time that things change is when people have active conversations with it. And I get people stop me in shopping centres. I got 3 people stop me at a kid's birthday party in the weekend saying they love my stuff, but sometimes it's too hard to listen to. And I said, but that's why I've done this, because I've got a platform where I can share these things. And my big thing is get people talking about it. I've had people ask me to set up a charity, take donations. I said, I've had people ask me to run for politics. I'm like, I don't want any of that. I just want people to have conversations, because the more people speak about this, the more people can identify. And if you're a parent and you've watched one of my videos, and I spoke the other day about how Snapchat offenders are weaponizing that, how normally when something happens to them, say if their favorite uncle abuses them, and their favorite uncle, they want to see him every weekend, and then one weekend they decide, I don't want to see him ever again. Most parents, oh no, that's fine, go see him. Or, sport, I don't want to play that sport anymore, I don't like the coach. People force kids to do it instead of sitting down and going, right, did something happen? You're not in trouble if you tell me. No one's going to get in trouble. Just let me know what happened. And a lot of the parents that I interview of victim survivors when we're about to go to court, every single time there's always a common trend where the parents go, I remember it was term 2 in 2001 where you changed overnight. It was after your 15th birthday. Something happened. We knew it. You've never told us. And it's a big red light for parents. And I always use the example. Have you seen the TV show Embarrassing Bodies?
No.
So Embarrassing Bodies is like a UK reality show where people with skin conditions or ingrown toenails or embarrassing things go to a doctor and they get it treated. And you never see on that show doctors go, ugh. And I always tell people, there's psychologists, there's GPs, there's psychiatrists, there's lawyers, there's people that are trauma informed. If you disclose to someone that you were sexually abused as a child, 1, it's not your fault. 2, there's help out there. And 3, you've been keeping the darkest secret in your brain for as long as you can. There's ways to help. It'd be like same with you in the military background. Or PTSD is massive in the military, but there's always ways for people to help go out and speak and be treated. And that's my big thing, is raising awareness. And if I can use my platform to save one person from being abused, or one parent to go, oh, actually, I'm seeing some grooming behaviour by this person, I'm not going to let my child see him anymore, my job's done.
And we talk about, this ancestral style, and this is where people are at risk, all of this. Why is it this 30 years that it takes, 29 and a half years, I believe you said?
23.9.
23.9, sorry, for this to be reported. What can we do to decrease that number, so it's down to much faster reporting, people are more comfortable? What can be done? And even for, if you're seeing friends or other family members or whatever, what can you do there? What is the best scenario to try and reduce that? Because that's the problem, is it brings in, of course, massive, you spoke about balance of probability. You're 2 decades on before it's reported. What can be done to try and
It's fear. So when children are abused, often the offender says, if you tell anyone, you'll go to jail, I'll go to jail, I'll harm your siblings. I had one person that said, if you ever tell anyone, I'm going to kill your dog. So it's, people still see themselves as that 4-year-old and they're too scared to come forward. I've used the example once before. I remember playing cricket when I was maybe 10 or so. I was at an oval, and when you play sport when you're young, the oval seems like the biggest thing in the world. And I played this one oval years and years ago, and I remember when I was batting, I'm like, there's no way in hell anyone playing could hit a 4. Like, this is just the biggest oval in the world. And then when I took my oldest son to the same field when he had a soccer game, and I remember walking past that pitch on the way to the soccer field, and I had a soccer ball in my hand. I could underarm throw the soccer ball on the full to the boundary. And people think, why are you saying this? It's because when something happens to you when you're young, you grow up. The offender doesn't. I've seen guys that are 6'6", 6'7", be petrified of seeing their abuser in court, who's this 5'3" withered old man, because people still think in their mind that they're the child that this happened to. So one of the main fears is their fear of retribution. One of the biggest things is they actually don't know what's happened to them. I think sex ed is about year 5 or 6 they teach it at school. I'm not saying teach that to year 2s, but what happens when a lot of children report contemporaneous abuse when they're young, it's when they first learn about body autonomy. So I think it's maybe year 1 or 2, they talk about, this is when it's all right for someone to touch you. And when someone reports being that young, they go to a teacher or principal and said, oh, that conversation we had, that's actually happening to me at home. But a lot of the times when people hear about that, they're too scared to report. And the thing I found most is that people will most likely report when they have children of their own, because the second they hold their son or daughter in their hands, they go, this happened to me, I don't want it to happen to my child. And that's when they then go to the police. And I've seen when they have children, they report their father, their uncle, their grandfather, and that's the thing that they actually need to actually get them over the line. You think if you're 6 years old and you're abused, 23.9 years after that is the most common age when people get married and have children. So there was one woman in South Australia, it happened to her when she was 8 and she didn't report until she was 91. So there's no, people report when they're ready to. I've had stories on the news where I've gone over the same teacher multiple times. I've had people come to me and said, I saw this story 5 years ago and now it's finally time to report. And most of the time I'm the first person that victim survivors tell about their abuse. And that's an honour for me, and it's humbling knowing that my work is actually getting people to come forward and report. And you think if you've lived with trauma and you've been dealing with that for 30 odd years, and just the look on their face when they finally just say it out loud and think, I've been carrying this secret since I was 6 years old and now 50. It's not. But my big thing is removing the stigma, so people can actually report and say, hey, I was sexually abused when you're 18, or so when I was 6, I'm now 18 years old. It's not going to be a thing where your mates go, oh, we're not going to hang out with you. People are going to say, oh shit, how can we help you? And that's my big thing. There's so many support mechanisms out there for victim survivors to come forward, and it's not going to be something where people cut you off, because this is not your fault. Like, when you're a child, you cannot consent to any sexual acts.
Yeah. What is and this may be a difficult question, but what is the legal definition of abuse of a child? What actually is it? I know everyone has this ethical, hey, there's just none of this, none of that. But if it's, I'll give you grandma a kiss. Oh, no, I'll give you grandma a kiss. And everyone, I've definitely been in that situation. Yeah. I don't consider that abuse. Does that meet the threshold? Where is the certain thresholds maybe legally, as far as beyond reasonable doubt, someone getting a conviction versus where you're sitting on the more civil side? Yeah,
so it mainly comes down to what is the intention, what is the actual act. So if you're at a grandparent's house and you're in the bath and they basically wrap a towel around you and tap you on the butt, say, all right, mate, go to bed, that's not abuse. It's when the adult is doing something for their own sexual gratification. So, prolonged touching, kissing in certain areas. I won't go into the detail of what are the main crimes, but you just think when you hear about sexual abuse of adults, it's normally the worst. I've had children that need reconstructive surgery because of what's happened to them, and this is, it's the unfortunate reality and the grim reality we face. But you see that one of the big things is, say, images at the moment, where you're not seeing people getting arrested for having one child abuse image in their possession. You're seeing guys.
Why is that though? Why has there been this shift? Is it just the digital age has shifted across?
It's the prevalence of it. Whenever you see a person getting arrested, the first thing you hear on the news, they've got 400,000 images.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You'll have 200 gigabytes of images.
A gigabyte, that's 1,000 meg?
Yeah.
So it's...
But I don't even know how this is possible.
It's monetized. So what happens? You see a bikie arrested. The first thing that happens is the police will go to the bikie's house. They'll invite news crews to come along, and they're getting their M-wagons and Ferraris on the back of their tow trucks and towing them off, saying, hey, look what we got. But I'm seeing guys that are career teachers, earning okay money, but they're driving BMWs, going overseas 5 times a year, and they're cashed up, and then they're getting arrested with 300,000 or 400,000 images. And you think, well, hang on, how have you got that many images, and how are you paying for your holidays? Because what was happening during COVID is, because all these sickos couldn't travel to Southeast Asia to go on their sex holidays, they were paying people overseas to live stream abuse material and actually tell them, do this to this child on screen, do X, Y, and Z, and they were doing it again and again.
How common is it? Like to me, who's just a normal person, who this just seemed like it's sickening. How common is this? Like, how common is something like that?
It'll shock you. So Christy McVie, who was a retired Western Australian police officer, she did a study a while ago, and Australia is the third highest consumer in the world of live stream abuse material. There are 500,000 streams a day into Australia of live child sexual abuse. 500,000. Yep, and this isn't per capita. The number one highest country is America with 330 odd million. Number two is the UK. I think they have about 70, 80, 90 million. Australia, 26 million. We are the third highest consumer in the world of live stream child abuse material. And it's happening, it's frequent. And when you see a young single guy or a old retired teacher that's going to Thailand 10 times a year. Like I've had one teacher at a school I'm suing, he's been kicked out of 2 schools for abusing children, and then he started teaching English to Thai children over there. And I actually found a post on his Facebook where there was a young child that was in a bed in his room, and then there's another one, a child sitting in front of him, and he's basically like massaging his shoulders while he's teaching English. And you think, how is this guy being let through? Like,
but on the sorry, not to cut you off, but what I don't understand is how he's been had something against him, and he's moved. Firstly, the ability to move schools. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the ability to still be able to travel on a passport. Like it's like we're not taking this seriously. Can you give an idea of, because I have no idea, if someone is caught with child's abuse material like this, sickening material on their computer, whether it be one image or 1,000 images, what sort of charges or time in jail or whatever is being brought against them? Because it seems like we're not taking it that seriously either.
There was one guy, I believe it was last year, he was found, I think it might have been a retired police officer or something in the public system. He was done with 160,000 images of child abuse material, and I did the maths. I can't remember the sentence off the top of my head, but it worked out to being just under 6 minutes per image that he was in prison for. And I've put my children in time out longer than 6 minutes. And 160,000 images this guy was in his possession. And the first thing you think, how did you get this? And my mum's 70, and she got a new iPhone about 2 or 3 years ago. She's always, I think when they switched over from when they shut off the old networks, like she had an old, I think she still had like a Nokia 3310 looking thing, like an old brick. And my mum trying to teach her an iPhone, she had no idea what she's doing. Now you see a guy who's in his 60s, 70s and 80s is able to access the dark web and to download this material. I don't know any normal person that would even know how to access the dark web. Like, to me, when I was young, I remember, was it Silk Road, the dark web, like we were young, it was about how people would buy their drugs from Amsterdam. And I don't know anyone that knows how to get in the dark web. Like, you can't go onto Google or anything like that to get on it. But you've seen guys that have had no technological experience whatsoever, the ones being arrested with these hundreds of thousands of images. And you think, well, firstly, how are they getting it? Are they producing it? Are they just sharing it? And look at their accounts. Like if they're paying for it, follow the money trail.
Well, that's what was going to be my next question, is how seriously do our enforcement agencies, whether it be from the your state police, federal police, into the intelligence agencies, etc., how seriously are they then exploiting this information?
It's monetized. But you think if you've got 500,000 live streams a day into the country of child abuse material, how can that be policed? Like,
yeah, I more mean, so we arrest someone and we see that they've got this, like, are we looking at, like, who is this child? Who is their pet? Like, are they fully exploiting this information to try and shut down these entire rings? Because obviously, as you put, this 60, 70-year-old person on the dark web using Tors and all this sort of stuff to get in, highly unlikely that he's a lone actor in this. And of course, this is material being sent, whether it's domestic or international. Are we then working interagency internationally? Are we going as far, but are we doing as much as we can to try, or are there big gaps in it's just too much to actually
Well, Shannon McCall, he was the family society worker that got the longest sentence in, I think, Australian history at that time for child sexual abuse.
And how long was that?
I think it was 37 years or so. which, you know, you think like you're getting people getting out of prison for murder in 20 years. And his was persistent sexual exploitation of children. So he was creating the abuse material and he was downloading it. The FBI were looking at him for years. There was a guy recently that was arrested at the border who I think is it Interpol in the UK or Scotland or maybe. They were looking for this guy as well. Like, there's been guys that federal agencies in Australia, America, all around the world have been looking for, and 3 of the worst ones in the world have been found here in good old South Australia. And these guys are, you know, we're talking millions of images. Like, there was one guy that was found with, I think, 400,000 images and videos, and it took the police about a year and a half to go through each image and actually lay charges. But what he was doing is every time he was going to court, he was charged with 30 or 40 new counts. Like, it's not like America where you see when they charge you with 400,000 counts and you're going to get, you know, 300 life sentences. What happens is the police will go through this material and say that Ashley Griffiths, who was in Queensland, he was charged with 1,500 counts and he pled guilty to only a few because police don't want to put victim survivors through this. And when it's something where it's images, it's found on some guy's phone and computer, well, it's very hard for them to argue around it. But when it's a physical act against a child, it's effectively your word against a child. So I've seen people in the NDIS where they're sexually abusing non-verbal children and the police simply say, we can't do anything about it because a child can't speak. There was one in South Australia who was, he picked up a child from school one day and it was in respite care. And then I think the child was maybe 14, 15, non-verbal, male, autistic. And the parents changed the nappy that night and found blood in the nappy, took to the hospital fearing an infection. And the police came and said, there's signs that your child's been sexually assaulted. And the police went out to the carer's house, found cameras. Carer said, he didn't take the child. He took the child out to a playing ground, never went home. The footage showed that the carer took the child home for 20 minutes, half an hour, then went back out, and the police couldn't do anything because the child couldn't disclose what happened. And that's what we're seeing at the moment, where the offenders are picking their children. Like, there was a study there was an interview with an American child sexual offender that said, well, what do you look for when it comes to children abuse? And he said, well, firstly, children without a father figure, prime targets, and also, secondly, children who have fathers that don't look like they're stronger or meaner than them. And you look, I'm doing all the matters against McGill Training Centre, where it was a training centre that had a pedophile ring. Sorry, edit that out. A child sexual ring that was operating out of there, and these guards targeted every single person that went in. And one of the first questions they asked is, you know, is your dad on the scene? Oh no, just mum. Right off the bat, bing, there's our target. And the thing I learned from McGill is the reason why child sex offenders are generally most hated in prison is because statistically a significant population of people in prison were victim survivors of child sexual abuse. That's the main reason why they're hated. And so you think if these offenders start getting put in general population, you think how quickly most people think twice. If you're going to take everything they have and put them with the hardened criminals,
I don't know why we're protecting
them. They've
done the most heinous act ever. In my opinion, it is way more heinous than murder. Everyone in their life has had an incident happen to them when they see red and have said, I could kill that person. Now, very few, thankfully, go through with it, but you see why this is exactly why something like the Epstein situation is, firstly, the most high profile imaginable of exactly what we're talking about, that is completely swept under the rug. So why is there any faith in any of these systems? But you can see why the leverage, if you're one of those people who then has a photograph of you with this person, why the leverage over them is unimaginable. It's any leverage, whatever. It's any leverage for any situation at any time. But also, we've set a precedent that from that's the most, like, these people are oligarchs, aristocrats, politicians, CEOs, and nothing's happened. And there's videos of it everywhere. It sets an international precedent. So it's disgusting and it's dangerous, but it is the most heinous thing. And there's all these protections in place, protecting their pensions, protecting their super, protecting them in jail. All this, like, it's ridiculous.
What?
And the taxpayers, like, I don't care. Honestly, I don't care if it's beyond reasonable doubt if they're marched out the back of the prison and shot up against the wall. Like, I think most people are like, yeah, this is fair enough.
Yeah, most people don't realise about Jeffrey Epstein was years and years before he was actually arrested, he was charged with sexual offending against a 14-year-old. And there was this massive investigation back then because he effectively received something like a 30-day suspended sentence because there was all these arguments around corruption about public office. But you look at, say, you spoke about how it's the most unforgivable crime. You think murder. There's legal justifications for murder. You know, self-defense of myself, self-defense of another. It was excessive self-defense. It can be downgraded manslaughter. You look at drink driving. You know, there's a mitigating factor. You know, I had to drive my mum to the hospital. You look at even adult rape, for instance. You know, sexual consent can be withdrawn at any time. So you can be halfway through an act of sexual intercourse, and they say, "Hey, stop," and that means stop right away. There's no legal justification for the sexual abuse of a child. Like there was one guy once that was whinging to me that, oh, you know, I did nothing wrong. She came on to me, and I said, she's 7. Like, there's no legal justification. And even the High Court, there was I can't remember which judge said it. Said this is a standalone crime that's separate to anything. Like, you think I've had friends that have been arrested for drugs, have been arrested for fighting, for, you know, driving offences, all kinds of stuff. You'd still catch up with them and hang out. It's an out of character thing. It's a stupid mistake. But I don't know anyone that would give a child sex offender a different, another chance. I had the most...
except all the CEOs in America who then caught up with Epstein after the fact.
Yeah. And, you know, and still, like, look at George Pell here. Like, George Pell, people writing character references for him, saying how much of a great bloke he is. But, I mean, I had here about maybe a year or so ago, I'll never forget this. I had a guy that's pled guilty to sexually assaulting 2 of his 3 daughters, and the other daughter's come forward now and said he did it to her as well. I called him and said, right, you know, I'm acting on behalf of your one daughter. We're going to be suing you. You should probably get a lawyer. It's going to do an action. You need to defend this. And he's gone, I'm not going to get a lawyer. I'm going to self-represent. I'm going to win. I've done nothing wrong. I said, you've pled guilty to it. Oh, I had to because I ran a business and I couldn't afford legal fees. So no, you pled guilty to like a parking fine, not for sexually abusing a child. And then about the next day later, I get a phone call from this guy's wife, who's been with him ever since the abuse of children. And she said to me, you can't do this to my husband. He's done nothing wrong. I said, look, with respect, you should get a lawyer, speak to the lawyer. He's pled guilty, so liability is not an issue. And she goes, do you know what? I hope someone sexually assaults your children. I've got, excuse me? And I'm like, this is the guy's partner who trusts her grandchildren around him, that's been married to him, even though he's abused all of their daughters. And, he's done absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, it happens time and time again where I've had 2 in the past month where the rare circumstance of people that have gone to jail over this, and they've said to me, no, we're going to win this. We've done nothing wrong. I'm like, you've been found guilty. No, I've done nothing wrong.
On that, because you get a lot of these high-profile cases out of Hollywood or in governments of adult sexual assault abuse, where it ends up turning over that it may have been a false accusation. It may not meet threshold, and you spoke of then with adult being able to withdraw consent at any time, as well as where, you know, 2 people might hook up in a club and one was in there on a fake ID and they were 17 and whatever. With this, like, false accusations, how prevalent does that happen, or is it a 1%?
With adults, I think the percentages is a lot higher than children. It's very rare. I think there's been studies that have shown about how children are very, when it comes to truth. Like, you think if you're with a child and they're like, Daddy, why has that guy got a big nose? Like, a lot of children tell exactly how it is. But a lot of the times with, say, young females, for instance, there's clinical signs where females are going to the doctor every other week with urinary tract infections or cold sores around private parts. That's when it's like, okay, well, hang on, what's happening here? You know, Uncle Bob came over the other day with a cold sore and this has happened. It's very rare when children report the worst. Like, they might say, oh, you know, Uncle Bob touched me on the bottom, when they tapped on the back. But when it's like, hey, you know, mummy, Uncle Bob put something in me, because it's when they go to school and they realise, oh, hang on, that's not normal. But yeah, I don't know the percentages of adults coming forward. You often see the stories popping up where someone recanted a testimony and things like that. But, you know, that's one of how many that put up. And especially with adult sexual abuse, there's always, or in this day and age, there's text messages, there's you know, doorbell cameras there, and a lot of victim survivors, when they are sexually assaulted as an adult, the first thing they do is go to the hospital, and the hospital will provide a rape kit, and right off the bat they're like, here is strong signs of a sexual abuse taking place.
Yeah. I want to touch on the signs. So what would you, as a father, as someone who works in this, what signs would you tell your friends or your family to look for, or that red flags, like, hey, this is something that looks like something may be going on? You touch on cold sores, you touch on kids saying this, that. Where do you have between, Uncle Bob, you know, touching on the back of my bum, and then, hey, this is really bad signs? What would you be like, advising friends, family, whatever, to be?
Say if you've got 3 children and one of your neighbours only ever focuses on one of your children, you know, buys them toys, offers to spend time with them. That's one of the main red flags. Other red flags would be if you've got an adult communicating with a child on Snapchat, for instance, or apps where messages disappear. I think Instagram or Facebook now have a thing where you can actually, something like that. It's when children are having avoidance behaviour. You know, they don't want to go to their favourite friend's house anymore, or they had a sleepover and their attitude changed overnight. Urinary tract infections is a big thing. Blood in underwear for someone, especially a female who's not at the age of menstruating yet. That's always a warning sign. It's the most heartbreaking thing is that whenever a child does disclose or comes out to their parents when they're older, it's just the parents' reaction is like, we knew she didn't want to go. We kept forcing her to go on these camps, kept forcing her to go to, you know, stay at our neighbour's house when we went out. And it's you know, I don't know anyone that would have a close relation to a child that's not theirs, where they're messaging in their all hours of the night, or you know, add me on Snapchat or things like that. It's just weird. The one thing with Snapchat now is that the maps function on Snapchat, you can actually locate a child where they are at the exact moment within 50 centimetres where they actually are. So if you type in maps on Snapchat and say if there is an uncle that is abusing a child, and they can look on their Snapchat, see their home, know that mum and dad are at work, and then go over there and commit an act of abuse. So there are, I mean, the warning signs are just, you know, listen to what your child says. If your kid says, I'm sick today, I don't want to go to school, and they're not hot, you just, all right, just go to school. But, you know, why don't you want to go to school? Always ask why they don't want to do something, and, you know, that simple question could save a life. And if you are suspecting something, just let them know you're not in trouble for it. You know, it's not your fault if anything's happened. You can talk to us, because it's just instilled in their brain. If they're being abused by a relative, you know, you'll never be able to see me again. We'll both go to jail. You know, you'll go to jail. You won't be able to see mummy and daddy. I'll hurt your siblings.
But this is the problem with our legal system, is if so few of these people are getting convicted, getting punished, or getting correct punishment, then these people may be weighing up, these young people in their head, going, well, at worst, they might go away for a couple of years, then they're back, then, you know, is it worth destroying the family over? Like, this is the problem where I see the weakness of our system is leading to people not reporting.
Which is exactly why I started the Super Survivors campaign, because at least it's going to be a deterrent for people to come forward and say, hang on, I've been working for 40 years. I've got $1 million sitting there in my super account. If I offend, I'm going to lose all of that, even if I'm not charged. I think over the past maybe 5 years, I can count on one hand of the matters I've done where there's been a criminal conviction that we've won against. Most people don't even go to the police. There's not reported. I've had, like, there's been one guy that basically spent all his money going to the High Court, and, you know, he was just, I think 10 people have come out and spoke out about him, and this guy's been professing his innocence, and he was a teacher at St Ignatius in South Australia, and you've had people from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s have come forward, people that wouldn't even know each other. Like, it's not even, you know, one guy was in year 8 and then the person next year. These people of, you know, 5-10 years apart describe the exact same thing. and he only went down for I think 2 of the counts. And this guy has a significant history, and even with that, I thought, well, hang on, why isn't more people come forward? Pete Liddy, for instance, the magistrate I touched on earlier, in I think it was 2010, there was more people that came forward and wanted to report him criminally, and he successfully got a permanent stay of any further criminal matters because he said, I can't get a fair trial because I won't be able to get a jury because everyone knows Pete Liddy is synonymous with sexual abuse of a child. So we'll do a judge alone trial. Like, especially the cashed up ones, they know the loopholes, they know what to do, and that's why I'm telling people just go straight for the jugular. If you don't want to go to the police, you see, well, for instance, look at the Brittany Higgins trial. People saw that she got crucified, that Lerman sit there in silence for 2 years, didn't have to say a word. Everything about her story was scrutinised. Everything about her life was turned upside down. People see something like that and go, we don't want to report. We don't want to go through this. But the second you sue someone, hang on, they don't get the right to silence anymore. They have to defend this. They get cross-examined. People take their agency back, and people realise, hang on, this is my day in court. If I'm not going to be able to meet this beyond reasonable doubt, well, I've got other avenues to go down the path and actually get the justice I deserve.
Is this getting worse? Are we seeing an increase in child sexual abuse?
Yep, there was I think it was a 2021 story in the Sydney Morning Herald that said in New South Wales alone, child abuse has gone up on average 4.6% per year.
Is this going up because of more reporting, or are there more acts happening? Because, for instance, like, cancer looks like it's getting way worse. It's not. It's just we can diagnose it earlier and better. So is it more reporting, or is it more...
I think compared to 20 years ago, you weren't seeing the level of child exploitation material being transmitted to people. Like probably even more than 20 years ago, you'd have to go and get photos developed and trade it that way, where now it's the prevalence of, and this is, a 15-year-old messaging his girlfriend an inappropriate image. This is, a 60-year-old having an image of a 4-year-old being sexually abused. And so those matters are definitely going through the roof. But the court list that I see when I do my weekly videos is about 50-50 between sexual abuse of a child and possession of child exploitation material. So I don't know what the other states is. I do the videos in South Australia because we're the only state in the country that actually has the person's name and the charge. But if you're looking at where I'm doing videos where 25% on average per day is related to child sexual abuse, and the next closest charge is sexual abuse of an adult, which is probably about 5 to 10% a day, you think this is a massive problem. A lot of them are historical coming forward. It's very rare that we're actually seeing contemporaneous reporting now of children. It's still a bit of a delay. But that being said, people still come forward and say, last week, Uncle Bob touched me. They're getting arrested. But I think it's mainly that more people now are talking about it, but also the ease of offenders in actually accessing this material. I can't remember who it was. There was an advocate maybe the past year or so that actually said that within 45 seconds of going on Twitter, they were able to locate abuse material which they were looking for to try and prove a point. So it's everywhere now, especially with AI, where a lot of sickos are, if they've got a friend's child that they are attracted to, they'll download photos of them off social media and put them through AI, and then the AI will generate sexualized images.
Is that illegal?
It is, but the problem is that the South Australian government are only recently outlawing AI-generated abuse material. You think the South Australian government, they're always on the pedestal saying, we're going to be the strictest government in Australia on child abuse. It was the 1st of July 2025 where they finally said, we're not going to let convicted child sex offenders work with children anymore. So until 1 July 2025, a convicted child sex offender could work with a 14-year-old. Yep. A convicted...
When we have what was the rate of conviction? Like
0.003%.
0.003%. So you're the... Okay, yeah.
So you think down at, say, Glenelg Beach, for instance, there's a boost juice down there. You've got daily basis, you've got, 11 to 14-year-olds there going to the beach in bikinis, in bathers going down there.
Little kids running around naked on the beach.
A convicted child sex offender could still work at a boost juice until 1 July 2025. They could still work at McDonald's. They could still work at a shopping centre that's frequented by children.
That's beyond reasonable doubt.
Yep. And then they've...
Sickening, isn't it?
Well, it's like, how are these things that you're trying to say we're doing something great with this when it's something as boneheaded as that? We've got now they're trying to say that they want to set up a child sex offender registry. Where is it? It's been 3 years since you've promised this. We've had our South Australian government have said that they're going to indefinitely suspend child sex offenders who have offended again. But the South Australian Criminal Law Committee went to the government and said, you realise you're just doing this on paper to make a statement. If you try and indefinitely detain a child sex offender who's going through court for a second time, they're never going to plead guilty. They're going to go to trial. They're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. They're going to go to the High Court. It's going to come back down again. By that time, the victim survivors are going to be like, I don't want to go through this again. And so by saying that, they're actually going to be weaponising the system against victim survivors and make it more traumatic for them. Governments are trying to do around the country, are trying to do things that, hey, look what we're actually doing for this. But you look in South Australia, until a few months ago, the Minister for Child Protection was actually the Sports Minister as well. And so there'd be weeks, there was a week where it was like 25 children in state care were impregnated this year. But, you know, but we brought Katy Perry to Australia. We brought, we're bringing Live Golf here. It's a level of disconnect where they're trying to say, hey, we're protecting children on one hand, but it's like, what are you doing? 25 children were impregnated in state care. What have you done? Nothing. You've got a national...
One. It's too many. Everything needs to be pushed.
And even last November, there was a High Court decision that came down. It was called Bird and DP. And it was churches, surprise, surprise, deep pocketing victim survivors go all the way to the High Court to try and say we're not liable. The High Court found that volunteers of churches no longer bind the church for acts. So if you're a priest that were technically never employed by the church, if you sexually abuse a child, the child cannot sue the church. That was a High Court decision. The High Court came down and said, but if the states legislate around this and say that they are liable, then this loophole's closed. That was November last year. Guess which state? Or guess how many states have closed that loophole since? None. I went to meet with the government in, I think it was December last year, and they put that, I met with the Liberal government, they put it to the Labor government, nothing.
Why? Like, why is this? Is it, there's no, it's not that this loophole would open up this or that, or...
No, the Catholic Church is the third biggest landowner in South Australia. The church is basically saying, we don't have to pay tax anymore, and we're not liable for the priests that we know are going around abusing children, and the state government is not closing that loophole. Victoria is trying to get it closed, and they're facing massive opposition to try and get it closed. They're saying...
Why is there opposition?
What
is their arguing point?
I just don't think they want to piss off the churches. Look at South Australia, we're the city of churches. You think if there is something that's going to be costing the taxpayer tens of millions of dollars, if not billions, it's a loophole that the highest court in this country have said states need to close this loophole. Why isn't it done right away? You think if they were going about, say, politicians need a pay increase, it'll be voted on that day. Yeah. This is something where, again, it is... The highest court has said this is a loophole that's going to be exploited. And we'll think until about 2015, what churches used to do is they'd be sued and say, hey, we're not a legal entity. We just hold property on behalf of a trust. You can't sue us. The National Redress Scheme said that's not a thing. We're going to make sure that if you're sued, you're liable for it. But now you think if a priest lives in a church for 40 years, lives there, does sermons, has all of his tasks are akin to that of employment, but he's not an employee, even though his accommodation's paid for, food's paid for, everything. He's sexually abusing 150, 200 children. The churches then say, we're not liable for it. He was never an employee. You watch how quickly churches will destroy employment records. You watch how quickly they'll try and say, we never paid this guy a cent. But again, it's another one of those things where the governments are aware of these loopholes. I always say, this is no longer a knowledge problem. It's an accountability problem. How many people, if you did a poll of how many South Australia, or Australians even, would say, here is a High Court decision, should the taxpayer be liable for the acts of church, or the church be liable for the acts of the church? I don't know any person that would say, I'm a taxpayer, don't worry, I'll pay for that. It's, again, another bonehead decision that our government just lets slip through the keepers, all whilst they want to spend millions of dollars on golf. This is... Making that one law change is not going to cost the taxpayer a cent. It's going to save the taxpayer money, it's going to deter offending, and it's going to compensate victim survivors. Why wouldn't you do that?
Looking at the political, ideological environment in the Western world at the moment, it does scare me with this rise of, in the good nature rise of the LGBT stuff in the beginning. Now what we see is, in a lot of what I see, is over-sexualizing in classrooms, in children, of ideological positions of this or that. Have we seen an uptick in any of that? Like these drag shows for children. They like this stuff is, for me, this is akin to child exploitation and over-sexualizing of children. Have we, like, do you see much of this having a real effect on this?
Most of the offending is done by straight men.
Yeah, that was actually, this is one of the things that I've written down, is what is the most common, like, group, if we were to group by, I guess, age, by gender, by orientation, by race, by whatever, what is, by percentage, because of course we're overall a white European country, larger percent, but by percentage, is there any like outlying in this? Because you hear about what the Brits talk about, these Pakistani grooming gangs and this and that.
Straight men between 40 and 70. That's basically it. Like, whenever the Victorian childcare worker that was recently charged with hundreds and hundreds of counts, he was a homosexual. I believe he might have been transgender, but the transgender and homosexual community got a lot of backlash over that. But it's very rare where a homosexual male offends against a child. It's usually straight married man, straight man with a girlfriend, and the homosexual community got a very bad rap for that. When it's I think that I wouldn't know the exact stats, but out of hundreds and hundreds of cases, I think I can only count, I think there's one. So there's two, one male and one female that identified as homosexual that offended against a child. It's all straight people. And the weird thing is, when there's convictions, or the rare time, there was a guy called Thomas Ackland, who was a teacher at Kadina that offended against multiple children. When he had his sentencing remarks, he got a psychiatrist to report on him, and he said that even though he committed crimes against 14 young boys, he said he's a straight male. He has a girlfriend. It's very rare that you see a person of transgender background, or I think there's only been one transgender in South Australian history that's been offended, and that was someone a few months ago. And but yeah, it's straight white males basically. It's your grandfathers, your fathers, your uncles, your one of the big things is stepfathers as well. Like, one of the reasons why I said there should be a national sex offender registry is because of blended families. Imagine if mum gets divorced and meets new guys about to move in. Why shouldn't she be able to go to a police station and said, here's my new partner that's about to move in. I would like to know if he has any historic offending against children. That's
completely.
Yeah. And you look at the guy I spoke to before about how it was only 1 July this year that convicted child sex offenders can work at places. Imagine if you're having not like a child's cafe, but if you've got a place that's frequented by children massively, say if it's a coffee shop next to a school or something like that, and you've got someone that persistently puts in applications, why as an employer shouldn't you say, hey, do you consent to us in running your name through a database? If someone said to me, hey, can I run your name through a child sex database to make sure you've never abused it, I'll be like, sure, go for it. You do police checks to place, yeah, sure.
Or should it just be tied to the police check?
Hard thing is, the police check is convictions, I think. I'm not sure if it's charges, where you think if you've got a guy that's been charged with child sex offences in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, never been convicted, who would want that person to come move in with them? It's and that's why the registry would be such important. It's another deterrent factor for these people. Throw everything you can at them. And it's one of the reasons why I think the Greens are against it is because they don't want to promote vigilante behaviour. Out of 13, 14, 15 years of law, I think, I can't remember when it was amended, 2011, 2012. Ever since then, I've seen 2 instances of vigilantism. I saw one offender leaving court, and the mother was actually following behind him and punching him. And then the other one was, I think, a guy, when he was like 40, he disclosed to a friend he was abused by this guy and went to his house and broke his jaw that night. But, you know, the promoting of vigilante behaviour, if you know that someone's abused your child and they're in court facing charges, you think the parents or the brothers or the sisters will be the first people that goes to that guy's house? Never happened. I can't remember any time in Australian history that a parent of a child that's been abused has actually gone to the house and harmed the offender. And they're if anyone harmed...
I'd be more restrained than I'd be if it was...
Yeah, and that's the one thing. Like, why... Like, some of the American systems, it's not like, you know, put in your map or put in your address and we'll give you the guy's name and how far it is from your house. What they do is say, here's the guy's photo in the area. Or even the Queensland system, they're actually looking at implementing this right now after Daniel Morecombe. And they said one of the things they want to do is, if there is a child sex offender that hasn't met their reporting obligation, hasn't turned up for the police station in a week to report, they're just going to put this person's face on the news and say, have you seen this person? Won't say its name or location, just say, have you seen this person? They've breached their reporting obligations. And it's going to be up for a short time and then it's disappeared. Again, it's another instance where saying, hey, if you offend, this is the worst crime imaginable. We're going to throw everything at this to make sure it doesn't happen.
How you touched on before, and I read a recent article on this as well, is sex tourism. Now, the article that I read, this was talking more about Americans into South America and actually into Africa, but it will sit on Australia. Australia, of course, is a very wealthy country given our neighbouring states. And a lot of these states, you do have a lot of people go for sexual tourism to places like Thailand or whatever, but also people go there just because these are beautiful places and beautiful cultures. How common is this, and what is being done, I guess, internationally to try and protect that too?
Well, I can't remember anyone that's ever been arrested in recent memory about going on sex holidays. If you think there's a guy that goes to Thailand, 12 times a year, that's a single bloke that's there for 3 or 4 days at a time and come back, so questions should be asked about that. It's that you think you can get accommodation over there very cheap. The flights are quite cheap, and we're seeing people literally giving children and communities literally cents the dollar to perform these acts. When I got spoken to by the Department of Home Affairs, it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, they heard about me through the law change. They said, we want to talk to you about this fund that we're setting up to compensate victim survivors of sex holidays over in Southeast Asia. We're going to set up a $100 million fund to try and compensate any of these children that have been subject to sexualised acts. So, all right, great. You've been working on this for a year. 2 questions. Who's going to fund this? Oh, the taxpayer. Okay. Number 2, how can you find a 1-year-old in a Southeast Asian village? Oh, I said again, like, why wouldn't you throw more at these offenders, or why wouldn't you actually start setting up task force where if they notice that someone is going to Thailand very frequently that doesn't have any employment prospects over there, why wouldn't you go and just be like, hey, just come to have a chat with you about your holiday and what are you doing? Or even at the airports, when people are going there, you look at Border Patrol, the TV show, how shady do people look when they just ask, oh, what are you doing over there? What are you doing? Where are you staying? Little 2 or 3 questions like that might actually deter people from going back because they're being questioned. And it's not like it's a one and done with these people where they go on one holiday and they're done. It's constant. It's, whenever they've got money to take off for a week, they go and do it. And, how is a person, if you think on paper that they're earning 80 grand a year and you see a guy going overseas 10 times a year driving a brand new BMW, you think, what are you doing? A lot of them are actually going over there, creating material of them abusing a child, then monetizing it by selling it online. And, in this world of crypto, people are actually using that. And I'm not up on the lingo, but it's encrypted or non-encrypted apps where people actually use it where it can't be...
Yeah, encrypted. End-to-end encryption, like Signal chat, for instance. If you signal me, you have an encryption, you have a key, I have a key. That can only be between us, and it can be removed. It's a little bit... It's not as simple as that, but yeah, this encryption. But
like when people are going over there and going, right, well, I can actually spend $5 and I can watch a guy abuse a child on live stream on the encrypted end-to-end thing, and there's my $5, and Didn't cost me much. I didn't save it on my computer, so if the police come and raid me, they can't look what I'm doing. It's, there's always loopholes around it. Look at how drug dealers are that prevalent in this day and age, how they can find ways to, make drugs and distribute it. It's the same thing about child sex offending. You think there's a lot of drug labs, I guarantee you there's probably 100 times more bedrooms in the state that's producing exploitation material than there are drug labs in the state.
I guarantee that at end-to-end encryption, because I use end-to-end encryption all day, every day, to speak to sources who they would believe are dangerous. If this is a soldier in a country somewhere who wants to send me information on this and goes, if I get found out about this, I'll get shot, hey, this is key, do it, delete it, whatever. And I'm doing that for, hey, yeah, look, the Russians have taken this road or whatever. But I look at the other end and go, this is, I shit, the ability to do that. I don't know how in-depth these intelligence networks can be, but even then, even if they've got the ability to crack into these and whatever from, your ACEs, ASIO, or whatever, we're never going to have enough people to actually be doing it, and each case is going to take so long. What legally can we do if someone was an Australian, went to Thailand, abused a child, comes back? I don't know where the law sits on that. Would that have to be then done through the Thai government? What happens if...
It would have to, but it depends. If they bring images home to Australia, then they're in possession of it. But you think in a lot of these very poor countries, people would... there was a network of child sex offenders where they actually say, hey, if you're about to be charged, give this guy $100 Australian and things like that. There are ways around it. This is such a sick network of individuals that basically know the system left, right, and centre, that if they've been getting away with it for this long, they're going to keep doing it. So, you look at drugs, for instance, in Bali. You get people life sentences over there for possessing, a little bit of weed, where the guy that created the bomb that went off in the Bali bombings in 2002, he's now a chef at a restaurant. They actually promote this guy, and over there, they come down hard on these offenders. But if you're at a very poor village, all we need to do is give some people $5-6 and you're off to get away with things and abuse children. There's a lot that need to be actually done to trace people that are constantly going there.
That's what I mean. Yeah. What can we actually do?
Like I said before, even get someone if you at an airport, you get someone looking at the flight going to Thailand, you see a guy by himself. What are you doing over there? Just a question or two. Make them sweat and watch how quickly they react. And if they act weird, can you come with me? Can I look at your devices? Like the Ashley Griffiths, I keep going back to him. He's the Queensland Childcare Centre worker. There was about 6-7 years ago, there was a complaint about him from a staff member that said, I see this guy kissing a child on the lips inappropriately. And if that stopped back then, if the police went and at least just questioned him, just talk to him and look at his phone and say, hey, can we look at your phone? They would have seen thousands of images. Yet, we don't want to report. Or if it's especially a childcare worker, if they want to raise a concern with their supervisor that's abusing children, they are too scared of victimization. I'm a young female that works in this role where I'm a casual worker. I've seen my boss, who's a male, do something I think is inappropriate. Where am I meant to go? It's a privately owned centre. What should I do? I don't want to call the police because the police will say, well, you have to put your name down as a statement. But at least have some independent governing bodies that look into schools, into travel, into... Even you think if you're a travel agent and you become aware of a guy's go on there all the time for no reason, won't even give an answer, even just make a hotline. Look, remember 10, 15 years ago, there was a terrorism hotline on news where I think the commercial was, this guy gets a lot of pool chemicals delivered and doesn't own a pool, or I can't remember if it's an Asia or some commercial like that, but even that, we have a hotline if report anything of concern. Imagine if there was a dedicated hotline to, my neighbour goes to Thailand all the time and comes back and there's always young kids at his house and he doesn't have children, or he's going overseas, doesn't have family, and he's got a suitcase full of stuffed animals. Little things like that.
What can we do? Obviously you're fighting the good fight legally. What can the Australian public anywhere do? Is it just keeping an eye out for these, keeping your head switched on, look for those signs and not be scared to really, raise the flag?
My big thing about my whole campaign and about the awareness is just talk about it. Like, I have people that say, can we donate money to the cause? I says, no, just share my page. Like, talk about this. Talk to your children about the danger. Talk to your friends that are having children about, I heard at this school this is happening. Just have uncomfortable conversation like this, because the more we talk about it, the more that, we can never get desensitized to it, but we can actually, we can actually say, all right, well, how can we prevent this from occurring? Like, how many parents that has a 16-year-old that said, don't drink and drive? Like, it's literally instilled into everyone's brain. Or put your seatbelt on. God, from 2 years old, when the kids start putting their seatbelt on themselves, put your seatbelt on. Do this, Parents need to say, all right, well, don't talk to that person. Or, you can always tell me if something's happened. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. And the big thing is talk to your local members of parliament. Why isn't the High Court case of Bird and DP legislated around? Why aren't we allowed to access the superannuation of offenders? All things like that, because all that's going to happen is it's going to force the government into doing something for child sexual matters. And then as soon as there's greater deterrence and there's actually some redress that victim survivors can seek, these things are going to stop. But then if they can't offend here in Australia, they're going to go and try overseas and do it then. Or they're going to, be sneaky and take photographs of children at playgrounds. But still, if I don't know any parent that's, if they saw a stranger taking a photo of their child, wouldn't go up to them and be like, what are you doing? Call the police. Don't delete your photos. Call the police. It's all about actually getting people to realise that this is a problem and getting people to speak up. Like, when I started doing these videos, I had that many people stop me on the street saying we had no idea how bad it was in Australia.
Well, I didn't know. I had no idea until I saw your stuff. 25% of all cases in front of the court, sometimes 53%.
Yeah.
Is this.
And people are just like, hang on, what? And out of the year and a half of doing these stats, there's been one news story on it. One. And you think, and my big thing is, hey, let's just get this out in the open. Let's talk about it. Like you said, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Andrew, mate, I really appreciate you coming and talking to me about, this is an uncomfortable topic, but unbelievably important. On a personal note, thank you for fighting the good fight, and actually making this aware. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you think is important for what we're speaking about?
No, it's, there's the most precious resource this country has, or the world has, is our youth and next generation. And if we're not going to protect them, then what are we doing as a human race? We need to make sure that children are protected. Like, this is the one crime that is completely unforgivable, and why not throw everything at this? I don't want to see another offender that is arrested with 300,000 images that's sentenced to 12 months prison. I don't want to see another guy that's abused multiple children over the years where it could have been prevented years and years ago. I'm just sick of seeing the court lists bulk down with child sexual abuse and our government being silent on it. When was the last time you saw a politician get up and say, child sexual abuse is an issue in Australia, this is what we're exactly doing to get rid of it? Not lip service, not for clickbait or headlines, someone that actually has a concern. The thing is, it's not my job to protect children. It's the government's job. If they are that sick of me costing them money, put me out of a job. Literally, if you don't want me to sue, I was in an interview a while ago, and they actually said, what is the government doing about this? And I said, well, actually, 2 months ago, I was invited to a senior Labor minister's office. I've got the emails, I've got the calendar invites. So can you come in and have a chat about, child sexual abuse and other law changes and things like that? I went through security. I went up to this political senior member's office, and their advisor came out and said, are you Andrew Carpenter? Yep. You're doing too many civil claims against the state, costing too much money, you can't come in. I'm like, okay, that's pretty fucked up, but...
You can't be suing for potholes, are you?
No. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. And then when I said that on the radio, I said, look, I'm not into politics. I don't have any intention of running. I'm not going to say the person's name, so it's not my game. And then I became aware of a video where a minister was actually asked in Parliament, are you aware of what senior member of Labor asked him to go to the office and kicked him out? 3 times they denied knowing about it, and I'm like, yeah, if you're not part of the problem, you've got to be part of the problem, then why don't you be part of the solution? And the fact it's, if I'm ruffling feathers like that when I have no intention of going into politics, it's like I'm doing something right. But if they are that worried about me costing them money, change loopholes. If you don't want people suing the state, make the churches liable. If you don't want people suing the state again, well, go up to the offenders and say, give us their superannuation. And the only politician that actually wanted to speak out against this said, well, why should the taxpayer meet the cost of a child sex offender's pension? Said, well, what's cheaper to the taxpayer? Someone from 67 to expected age is 82, or someone from 18 to 82? No, to me, it's a no-brainer. It has to happen. And if these politicians want to stand in my way, well, I'm not going to go down quietly, because I'm going to get this law change, and I'm going to do something that they haven't been able to do before, and that's protect children. It's not my job, but if I have to do it, then I'm a stubborn prick and I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, and the institution of politicians and the media now who are ignoring this have nowhere near the amount of sway or influence that they think that they did have at one point. And you on social media, you can be a massive voice, sharing with guys like Two Worlds Collide, myself, and others. It'll create and rustle feathers, but this is exactly what we need. And anyone who is against this stuff, if it's intricacies of this or that, I understand, this is a very complex thing, but where it's so where the black and white of this is, my first thought is, why? Investigate that, look at their hard drives. If you're so adamantly against this, that raises suspicions on me, raises suspicion for me straight away. I'm like, hang on, why are you pushing this back?
Well, you think the government said how, to me, that it's quite hard to change superannuation legislation. I said, was it 10 days during COVID that you changed laws to allow early release of superannuation?
Yeah.
I mean, if there's a need for it.
It's not that hard. They've started taxing, if you earn over $250,000 a year, you're then taxed on superannuation under whatever thing. Like, that changed only the last few years, I believe. And they're talking about more with outside of capital, with capital gains and all. They can do it. There's just obviously no appetite.
So about 3 years ago, the Albanese government, they wanted to fill a $1.6 billion shortfall in the aged care sector. So they started taxing anyone that had more than 3 million super. And they started taxing superannuation on that. And I said, hang on, so to close a $1.6 million gap, you're taxing that. Child sexual abuse costs you about $30 billion a year. What are you doing to nothing? Okay, you won't touch super. But, so you have to be a hardworking Australian to have your superannuation touched. But if you're a child sex offender, then, you can live comfortably. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's just frustrating because this is 5.5 years, going on 6 years now of advocating for this change. And I'm sitting there going, how is this a divisive topic? You look at the elections, for instance. Elections are usually 52 to 48%. The voice vote was 70-30. All things like that. Politics are going to be something that can divide. But if you put this change to a vote, I don't know any right-thinking member of society that's not a child sex offender would vote against this.
Yep. Mate, thank you for your work you do, and thank you for your time today as well.
Thanks for coming in.